My mother gave me some pictures a while back of my dad when he worked for Rocky Hill Corporation in summers. They'd move their cattle up to Ash Valley, California, Northern California. And we went up there. I was probably 3 or 4 years old. I think we did that 2 summers. And these half a dozen pictures were taken up there, and I've had them in the cabin, and decided I should probably scan them before something happened to them and they were destroyed. So to show you where this place was, this is a picture from Google Earth that shows Ash Valley at the border of Modoc and Lassen counties, right there, and it's very close to the town of Greenville, which just burned down in the fire here this year, 2021. This summer. And it's just to the east of I-5, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, near Mount Lassen. It's a very dry place. I remember, the only thing I remember seeing much of was rattlesnakes. As a matter of fact, this place was one of the places where I had my first experience with a rattlesnake, and it was one of those traumatic experiences that just imprints on your mind. If it wasn't for the cow dog, Sam, barking and keeping the rattlesnake occupied, I would have probably stepped on him or walked across him or something. But anyhow, I just stood there and cried and yelled, and people came and killed the snake. And this first picture shows my dad here sitting on a horse in these old log corrals that were built. If you look real close, you don't see any trees except for the ones that were planted near the houses. So the native trees were all cut down, I guess, to make these log corrals. Out of necessity, they needed corrals, and they couldn't get lumber from nearby, so they just cut down all the trees and made corrals. I don't know. But anyhow, he was in his probably early 20s here. He'd gotten out of the Air Force and went to work for my grandpa for a year or two. And I don't know if he wanted to be on his own or whatever, but when you work for one of the Whitney Alphas, there's only one way to do it, a job. And it doesn't matter whether it's right, wrong, the easy way, or the hard way. It's the way the Whitney wants it done, and that's the way you do it. So maybe he got tired of that and decided to go out and start his own career. And so he started working for Rocky Hill. And we lived in a house over between Exeter and Woodlake. And then I remember in the summers, we moved up to this place up here in Ash Valley. And the cows all looked good. They looked like Herefords, not the cheap Mexican steers that a lot of the people raised back then. There's Sam the cow dog in his younger years, Australian border collie. There are a few trees out there on the mountains. I don't know if there's any left there or not. Cloudy. I remember some hellacious lightning and thunderstorms in the summer. Boy, it was sure cool. The old house we lived in, the windows would just rattle and the thunder would echo up and down this valley. It was like God was striking you with his fist. Here's the old barn was a couple hundred yards away from the houses, and there's a boardwalk that went from the houses out to about this area, and then you walk the rest of the way along the dirt path out to the barn and the corrals. The boardwalk connected, there were 2 houses there, I remember. We lived in one house, a white house, and there was another couple that lived in another house. And in this picture, it looks like the cattle trucks are all there. 3 of them or 4. They're either bringing cattle in or taking cattle out, which was a major revolution, moving a bunch of cattle like that. There's another picture of the cattle. And I don't know what that little cabin is out there in the background. It must have been a pump house or something out there all by itself. In the background there, you can just make out a little pond or a lake. I remember the geese and the ducks used to come in and land on that lake. And one time, I went out there with my dad and my mom. My dad had his old Winchester 97 12-gauge shotgun. It's about as tall as he was. And he loaded it up and he shot a geese flying over. So he had to get a piece of wood and strip down and get on it and paddle out to the middle of that pond and retrieve his goose and come back. And that was the only goose we ever shot and ate, because if I recall, it was about as tough as eating dried rawhide, and it's about as tasty as that dirt you see there in front of them cattle. This next picture is another picture of the corrals looking back toward the buildings. The houses are off to the right there. I don't remember what those other outbuildings were. I couldn't have been older than 4 years old because this was before I started kindergarten when we lived up here. I do remember the old white house we lived in had a well underneath the kitchen, and we had a suction lift pump on the sink, on the drain board, right hanging over the sink, and you had to pump that handle like you were trying to jack up a semi-truck, and about 20 minutes later water would start pouring out the nozzle if you were lucky, and if not, you had to replace the leather seal in the plunger. Here's another picture kind of looking the same direction. In this picture, one of the houses is pretty plain to see right there, just to the right of my dad on the horse. There's another house behind those trees in the far right corner, and it's the White House. That's the house we lived in. And here's a more modern version of the same thing. This is from late 70s or early 80s. Obviously, I'm out of the Navy here, and I think this is before Clay went back into the Air Force for his second tour. My dad is putting the brand on. Clay's holding the calf, or front leg and neck. I'm stretching his hind feet out. That's Edwin with his foot on the calf's hind feet. He is the husband of Vernie Bell, Cecil Jones' sister. So Cecil Jones is my maternal grandmother, my mom's mother from Missouri. So Edwin would be her uncle. They came up occasionally to watch us brand or bring us fruit or whatever. They lived north of Woodlake. This next picture, my brother Clay throwing a calf. For some reason, we must have let him out of the chute. The chute's just off to the left there. So he's throwing him on the ground, and then we'll give him the works. Here's a picture of actually using the chute. This is a pretty good sized steer here. This is the small calf chute. So this was probably one we missed earlier. So we're having to do him later when he's bigger. Clay's getting ready to give him vaccination, filling up the syringe, and it looks like must be earmarking him. And my dad's looking at the iron in the fire, making sure it's hot, and he's just about ready to put the brand on, which is about the last thing you do before you kick him out the gate. This next picture, this is one of my grandpa's pictures from, he was documenting things in the 70s, early 70s, 71, 2, 3, that time frame. And these are the ponds that were up on the 480 that he had put in, I think in the 60s or 50s sometime. And in this particular one, he's grousing about what was poorly engineered, and ponds should have been made so they were further down below the overflow pipe or the culvert pipe that ran under the road, because when the ponds backed up high enough, it filled up the culvert with sand and dirt, and then the water would come over the road and tear it up, and it wouldn't drain right. So another one of his many frustrations and headaches. These are pictures that came out of, I was going through a bunch of stuff I brought home with me from my last trip down, and these were some other pictures that were in a different package that I didn't see last time. So I thought these were significant enough to scan and add to the historical collection of problems that my grandpa had to deal with when he was ranching on Horse Creek. And of course the weather was always one, and this one picture show the results of the weather. Horse Creek big flood. This might have been, I don't know, 69 flood or something. That's the road that cut across the property, Horse Creek property, down just before you get to the McRae Corrals in the 80. And this was the road that went over to the Malloy place that a guy named Kinmuth bought. And he had this road put in. And those are the culvert pipes up there that they didn't get installed yet. But man, that creek cut through that road pretty good. Looks like about 4 or 5 foot deep. And then the bottom picture is up between the creek field pastures, the upper and lower creek field. And you can see that bank on the far side. If you can see dirt, that's erosion. So Horse Creek made a big swing through there and took out a little bit of Horse Creek flat there and ate it up and set it on down the line. And of course takes out the fence too, because all the brush and trash that comes down. And these pictures are more of his headaches. This is down at the 80 entrance off of Highway 198, where the Army Corps of Engineers put in the cattle guard and then fenced off the lower 80. But then when they backed the lake up there in the summer, about this time frame here, all the fishermen come up there to get all the bass that come up and hide in the weeds and stuff. And of course, fishermen don't know what a fence is, and they don't know what a sign means because they're all illiterate and inconsiderate morons. So they throw all their beer cans in their trash. They burn all the wood they can find at night to keep warm. And they tromp down all the fences. And they throw their trash all over. That kept my grandpa upset most of the time. And here's another picture that was pretty funny. These guys got ran out of where they were. They were up, there was a big fire up there somewhere in North Fork, so it drove them out of where they were camping up there. And so coming down the road, they just turned in here and found this place right here where the Kenmouth Road crosses the Horse Creek, and decided we'll just pitch our tents right here. That's Horse Creek there, dark spot down the road there. That's my grandpa's car in the foreground there, that Plymouth. And all the cars there belong to the hippies who moved down there and threw up their tent and decided to camp. And much to his consternation, he stayed 2 nights. I don't know if he didn't have the heart to kick them out or what, or maybe he was afraid they'd start a fire on his property. That's always an issue. You gotta be real careful dealing with people like that. So these are the things he lived with. More of the same, much to entice and enliven his life.